So as most of you guys already know, I have a ton of film cameras and I'm slowly working my way through them. And today I'm really happy to do the review of the Praktica PLC film camera. I took this camera out for a spin and I showed a video of me packing the camera bag before I went out for my family trip to Edmonton. And I'm gonna leave a link in the description of this video below. And I must say this camera really surprised me when I took it for when I took it out to test it out. First of all, like I showed in my other video on how to load film into this camera. Loading film into this camera was not quite what I expected because of the way the inside of the camera is set up. I'm not going to go too much into detail on that since I've made another video on that. So if you're curious to know how to load film into this camera, do click on the link in the description below. This camera, just to start off with some of the physical features on the body, it's a pretty simple camera. It looks simple enough. My camera is missing the cover for the battery compartment, and it's also missing a cover on the body, this part here, but it's fully functional and it works pretty well. So to start off, this camera is an SLR, so whatever you're actually seeing through the viewfinder here is what's going through this lens here. This is not your typical camera, this is not your typical SLR, and the only difference here is the mount for this lens. It's actually quite unique. This lens has the M42 screw mount. So my particular lens is the Pentacon Electric 1.8, and the name electric is implied because the camera is actually able to read the settings of the aperture right from the lens, and because it has these electrical contacts, these 3 electrical contacts that you will find when you unscrew the lens. These contacts are what enables the camera to read from the lens, and it reads it right from those pinpoints on the lens right there, as you can see. On the lens, the aperture goes from f1.8 to f16. And the dial for the aperture control is actually quite fluid. It rotates quite easily. It's a little clicky, which is awesome. I like that a lot. You have your range or focus dial, which is so smooth. It's very smooth. Also this button here, which allows you to switch from auto to manual mode. Right now it's in the auto mode, and if I switch it, it gets in the manual mode. In the auto mode, this camera will basically read the aperture setting on the lens. Your aperture would be fully open as you're composing your shot. Now the only problem with that is that there is no direct depth of field button like the other cameras that I have reviewed. You can't press one button just to reveal the depth of field. But the way you can go about it is when you're composing, you can switch this to the manual mode, and then based on the aperture that you have set, you will be able to see how your image is going to look like, because now you can see that the aperture is engaged in there. If I switch this back to the auto mode, just like that, you'll notice that the aperture it fully opens right now. So that is one way to be able to check your depth of field while you're shooting, right? And I'll do that again. You switch this to the manual mode. Right now it's in the auto mode, fully open. I switch this to manual mode with this switch over here, and notice right there, and now I can control and see exactly how my image is going to look like. So in a sense, this is actually a handy feature that this camera has. One thing that I would say about the position of this shutter button is it's actually quite convenient. It's actually almost natural to hold the camera this way and to position your finger right on the button. I love that about this camera. So this camera is actually supposed to take a 4.5 volt PX21 battery, but as you can see, I have in here a normal AA battery, and it actually still works. It operates the light meter just fine. So the shutter speed actually goes from 1 second all the way to 1/1000th of a second, and it also has the bulb mode as well. And this same dial also enables you to change your ISO/the ASA setting. If you check my other video on how to load film into this camera, it explains the ASA and the ISO setting, how to set it. But basically what you do is you lift this up and you're able to adjust your ISO setting just like that. And the ISO setting is the same as the ASA setting on this camera. They mean different things, but the numbers are practically the same. You also have your flash mount and your film winder right here. So this camera comes with a built-in light meter, and adjusting for the exposure is actually quite easy. That's one of the pros of this camera. As you look through the viewfinder and you just depress the shutter button halfway or partially, you will notice that the indicator would move on to the positive or to the negative. So that's actually one of the pros of this camera, which is the easy metering. I find that to be pretty intuitive. And one thing I noticed right away when I used this camera was that the finder was not very great. The images appeared a bit blurry, especially when I was focusing on subjects that indoors, especially subjects that were not well lit. I found it really difficult to get a clear focus of my subjects. However, when I went outside in a bright light outdoors, it was much easier to focus. The finder is a pentaprism finder. The center of the finder has a split image rangefinder in there, so you're able to tell when the images align. When the images don't align, that means that you're out of focus. When the image aligns in that split image rangefinder, that means it's in focus. I found that to be only useful if the image was well lit. If it wasn't well lit, it was kind of difficult to tell if it was aligned or not. And surrounding this is a microprism area. But generally, my thoughts about the rangefinder is it was only useful when I was in an outdoor setting or in a well-lit setting. So that was one thing that I would say one of the cons about this particular camera. Other than that, everything else seemed to be simple enough. Everything else seemed to work just well enough. It was nice to use, very handy. And the images that I got from this camera actually took me back to this whole concept of lomography, which I have been exploring lately. And I was a bit conflicted when I used this camera, to be honest. I liked the fact that it was simple to use. I liked the build quality of it, I must say. Very good build quality. Loading film into this camera was a bit more complicated than I expected it to be. The viewfinder was certainly not the best viewfinder I've worked with. It was a bit difficult to compose images when they weren't well lit. And before I go, in case you haven't subscribed yet, I really want to encourage you to subscribe. And if you like this video, please do click the like button. Thank you so much, guys, and stay safe.